In this tutorial, I'm going to share with you some techniques that you can use to digitally restore and retouch old photos. First, you'll need to scan your old photo into a high quality digital file. A 16-bit TIFF is preferable, or alternatively have a specialist company do that for you. Then you're going to need two things. The first being some photo editing software, and the second being a lot of patience. I'm going to be using Luminar Neo because there's some really cool, unique tools within that program that we're going to be able to leverage for this particular purpose. However, probably about 80% of what I'm teaching you here will be transferable to other high-end photo editing applications. Now, each old photo, old scan has its own unique properties and its own unique challenges that we're going to need to overcome. However, there are some things that just come up time and time again. So they are a washed out appearance, i.e. an overall lack of contrast, fading in specific areas of the photo, discoloration in certain parts, marks, spots, damage and even tears, a lack of focus, soft or unsharp image, and also bleached areas with completely missing details. I'm going to cover each of those old photo problems and show you how we can solve them with Luminar Neo. If you don't have Luminar Neo yet and you would like to get it, I've got a link in the description below with a discount code as well, so help yourself to that and let's get into Luminar Neo. In my catalogue here you can see that we have two photos, one scanned as a colour document, one scanned as a black and white. However, it is the colour version that I would like to work on, and the reason for that is if I open it up and use my scroll wheel just to zoom in, you can actually identify anomalies on the print a little easier. So for example, down here it's very obvious because this is red against the black and white that this is not supposed to be there, whereas in the black and white version this smear, this mark may just blend into the original, and so it's easier to see in a colour scan. So that's what we're going to work on. So I'm going to jump into the edit tab here. And the first thing I'll do is orientate the photo the correct way. So to do that, I need to rotate it, and I do that by right clicking, come to rotate in the context menu, and then rotating left. Alternatively, control bracket on the keyboard will rotate the photo to the best orientation. And the next thing I want to do is remove the border. It's extraneous information that we just don't need, and it's also going to confuse our histogram. And if you don't know what a histogram is or what any of that means, don't worry, I'm going to explain all of that. But for now, we're going to jump into the crop section here, and we're able to grab the handles and just bring those in. Currently, I'm constrained to the original ratio that the photo was scanned at, which was A4. However, what I'd like to do is just have a free cropping tool. So that means that I can crop to any dimensions that suit me. And so that way I'm going to be able to be much more precise and make sure I capture all of the photo. So now that we've got our crop tool nice and tight, we can see that the scan is actually just slightly off kilter. So what I'm going to do is just click outside of the tool, and that's going to allow me to rotate the crop. So we can make sure that it's nice and straight, and the bottom of that is just a little bit of white that isn't actually part of the print. So I'm going to bring that bottom part up to there. And if I'm happy with that, I just click the apply button. And now we have the original photo scanned and cropped exactly as we want it. I'm going to export another version of this that we're going to work on that's going to do away with that border. It's important that I keep my format as TIFF. I'm not going to resize anything. I'll keep it exactly as it is. The color space is Adobe RGB, which is a nice rich color space. And rather than having an 8-bit depth, we're as high as we can be at 16, which is exactly what we want. And then we just need to export that. And now in my restoration folder, I have that new cropped TIFF file that we can work on. Now, why would you do that? Well, there's actually a big benefit to doing that. Originally, we had that big border around the side, and the size of that was actually 37 megapixels. Now my new version that I've cropped down is only 11 megapixels. We haven't lost any detail or data on the actual photo itself. However, we've freed up a lot of Luminar's working memory because it doesn't have to worry in any way about those pixels that originally existed in the border. It only needs to put into memory and work on the smaller cropped version. My computer's about 4 years old now and starting to show signs of its age, and so anything that I can do to help Luminar run a little bit more smoothly, run to its maximum performance, I'm going to do it. And by cropping the photo down like that, that certainly sets us up in the right direction. Okay, let's open this file up, jump into the edit section, And let's start to deal with the lack of contrast. One of the best tools to enable us to do that, you might think, might be the Smart Contrast tool. But as I grab that and push it to the right, you can see that we're almost starting to bleach areas out, and that's just not what I want. Another option that we have is to bring the white point up and the black point down, and that's going to help to actually expand our histogram, which is actually what we want. So if you look at the histogram's distribution here, it should actually be going all the way from the left to all the way on the right, and that denotes a full tonal range in our image, right from black all the way through to white, which is exactly what we want. However, what you'll notice, even by pushing the whites all the way to their maximum and dropping the blacks all the way down to -100, we still haven't expanded the histogram all the way to the left. So what I prefer to do, which is an even better way to control things, if I double click those just to reset them, is to actually do that with the curves. Now don't get freaked out because it's really easy, and even if you're not using Luminar but an alternative photo editor, most good ones have a curves tool within them, and it's going to be the same. So let me show you what you do. This is going to be the basis for all contrast adjustments with maximum control. Firstly, we're going to grab the top point of the curve. Now this represents the white point, so anything that appears to the right of this point is bleaching out to pure white, which obviously we don't want that to be anything at all. However, if we have negative space, like nothing on this side, we have areas that are not pure white, and really we should. So what we're going to do is just start to drag that over until the curve starts to hit the bottom corner there. Now if you're not sure whether it's hitting pure white or not, what you can do is press J on your keyboard, and you may have noticed two little dots appeared by our histogram here. We can manually click them on and off as well, and what they are highlight and shadow clipping warnings. So if I push this over to the left again, you're going to start to see all these little red pixels appear, and what that's saying is anything that's red is bleached out to pure white. So that's not what we want, but at the same time we don't want no red at all. We basically want to bring this over until we just start to see red appear. Something like that is good. And now we can do the same with the bottom left corner, which controls the blacks. And so if I move this across, as soon as the data that exists in this histogram here, this graph, as soon as the information starts disappearing off to the left hand side of the graph, you're going to start to see these warnings that are saying, hey, all of these pixels that I've highlighted blue, you've lost information in there completely. They're now black. There's no data, no detail whatsoever, and that's completely the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here. And so what we want to do again is move that point until we just start to see those blue pixels appear. So I'm going to move that back over, and now we can start to ease that in until we start to see those blue pixels. There we go. Okay. Now we know we have the maximum amount of contrast to work with, which is perfect, but the shadows are getting a little bit crushed down, and so we can just counteract that by grabbing the shadow slider and just bringing that back up. Now let's have a look at our before and after, and we can do that either by coming down to this eye icon here and holding that down. That's going to give us our before, and release it to see our after. Now we have a much more contrasty version, before and after. Alternatively, just press the \/ key on your keyboard. Okay, so with that pretty straightforward technique of just dropping the black point, lifting the white point, we've been able to maximize the contrast within the overall image. So globally, the contrast is in a pretty good place. However, I've got an issue with my photo that I need to solve, and you may have picked up on it on the left hand and the right hand side. It's bleached either side. So I need to do a similar thing to what we've done here, and that is work on the contrast again, but I need to do it locally. So I need to do it in a way that's not going to affect the whole photo, but just those areas that I want to work on. So you talk into specific areas in your photo using masking. Again, it's very straightforward when you know how. So I'll show you. When we look at the photo as a whole, it's pretty easy to see on both sides of the image it's brighter than in the center. Not just brighter, but also lacking in contrast. So I suggest we do a similar thing to what we've done to the whole photo, but localize it here. So I'm going to close down that develop tool, and once you close any tool inside of Luminar Neo, it just drops into the edits tab. So it's still accessible. However, the great thing is we've now got the opportunity to add a whole new version of that tool. So we can come back in and play with our curves once again and do a whole new adjustment. And so I'm going to make an adjustment that's just going to apply to the sides. So how do I make something apply just to the sides? Well, I do it with masking. So I'll go into the masking section here, and an easy way to do it would be with a linear gradient. So if we click and drag, you can see that we can start with a very strong red area here. That means that 100% of whatever develop changes we make will be applied in this section, and then it's going to transition from 100 to the center line for 50%, and then drop off to 0 here. And so I don't want to affect this far into the photo. I probably just want to do that to about here, and of course I can come in and adjust this afterwards. So I'm happy with that on this side. If I want to add another linear gradient, I just jump out of the tool, come back in, and that allows me to now click and draw another one from this side. And now I can come in and make my adjustments. And so as I drag, let's say, the exposure slider down, you can see that we're darkening just those areas and then it's tapering off. So that's not what we want to do. We don't want to just darken it down. We also want to add contrast. And so now we're going to pull this slider across, and that's going to darken down that area. And whenever you increase tonal contrast, a side effect of that is if you have color in your image, which we do here at the moment, it's going to increase saturation. And so I'm just going to drop that saturation down there. And although it doesn't matter in the scheme of things because we will be desaturating the whole photo, that just allows me to better judge the brightness value of this area and this adjustment that I'm making here without being distracted by the bright color. What I can do is just boost up the shadows a little bit if I want, while still controlling those highlights. Now, if you're not familiar with the intricacies of how to use curves, don't worry about it. All you need to know for now is that black and white point shift. But I thoroughly recommend, if you want to get the most out of your photo editing, do learn that tool, because it's one of the most powerful ones in any photo editing software. I've put together a dedicated free tutorial that I'll link to in the description below. And if you want to learn other tools and how to use them as well, consider subscribing to my channel. That would be awesome. Lots of free content on there. Okay, now we've added some contrast back into the image, it's easier for us to see where those marks and blemishes are. So now we will move on to the cleaning up process. And there's a couple of tools that we can use to do that. One is the clone tool, and the other that is unique to Luminar Neo is an AI powered tool called Erase. I like to use the Erase tool just for getting rid of the smaller little spots, and then move on to the clone tool for grabbing detail from one area and patching it up into another. So let's deal with the Erase tool first and take a look. Okay, we have got our work cut out because this photo is a real mess. If I zoom in, we can see lots of little dots and spots that I need to deal to. We can see scuffs and marks. We can see a little hair up here as well. And we can also appreciate just how little detail there actually is in this photo as well. So we've really got our work cut out. So the first thing I'd like to do is come to the Erase tool here. So just click this, and that's going to give us a little brush that's going to allow us just to paint over the marks that we want to get rid of. So we just paint in red problem areas and then come down and just click the Erase button here. And then Luminar is going to use its AI to clean those areas up. And we can use the eye tool to see our before and our after. Good job, Luminar. So if I come over here to some of these more problematic areas, and I'm just going to put a nice big dot over each of those. You can control the size of your brush just by using the bracket keys, so I can make it nice and small. If I wanted to go over the hair like this, I could with a small brush, or if I wanted to do things a bit quicker, I can increase the size and do that. Now, the number of dots that you cover in any one go is going to determine how long it takes Luminar to actually calculate what needs to go in their place. And depending on the speed of your computer and just how much patience you've got, it's entirely up to you how you work. I like to just work on a couple of dots at a time, erase them, assess that I'm happy with the result, and then move on. But if you wanted to, you could actually cover lots of the anomalies all at once, hit erase, and then just wait to see what Luminar comes back with. The problem is that the more you ask your processor to compute, the longer you're going to be waiting, and then potentially, if it does it wrong, if you're not happy with the result, you've got to start again and go from the beginning. So I just prefer to work in smaller batches and then assess those results. And if Luminar hasn't quite nailed what you're after, normally it's pretty good, but if it hasn't, you haven't lost all of that hard work of painting in the areas that you want to erase. Okay, let's come to the eyeball tool and toggle our before and after. Before and after, that's pretty good. But as you can see up here, this little line here, for some reason, the AI thought it would be a good idea just to introduce that, which obviously I do not want introduced. And so I can just go for a second pass and get rid of that. There we go. I'm just going to work my way around the image now, cleaning it up, and I'm just going to fast forward this bit. If I'm working with small little dots like this, I'm usually pretty confident that Luminar is going to do a good job, and so in those instances I don't mind doing it all at once. If you have straight lines that you want to take care of, so for example this anomaly here, what you can do is just click once at the top of the line, hold down Shift on your keyboard and then click at the bottom, and that's going to create a nice straight line. That technique's great to know because it works with any brush inside of Luminar. If you make a mistake like I just did then, you just press Ctrl-Z and that will get rid of the last stroke. Now the precision that you apply to your own photo edit and the time you take really does depend on your circumstances. Now when you zoom out to different magnifications, it becomes easier to see certain areas that you may have missed when you're zoomed in, for example. Okay, so that's the erase tool and how to use it. Now because you're paying attention, you will have noticed that the smeary mark down the right hand side of the photo is still there. I haven't erased that, and that is because, well, it's not the right tool for the job. The right tool is actually the clone tool, because that's going to allow us to sample from one area of an image and paint it to another. So the erase tool, we're getting the AI just to make a guess at what should be filling in that area, and it's not very good at doing that when you're asking it to work with large areas. Works nice when it's nice small little scuffs and marks like we saw before. So the clone tool is what we need here. I'll show you how that works. So we'll close down the erase tool, scroll on down to the very bottom in the professional tab. Okay, so now we have the clone tool, and it's asking us to click to set the source. So basically the source is the area we're sampling from. So for example, if I were to click on this gentleman's face here, and then I move my brush somewhere else, wherever I move that to, and click and start painting, that is going to steal from the one area that we are here and paint it where we're brushing in. And so currently my strength is set to 55%, so we don't see the full amount of that guy's face, but if I push it to 100 and then paint it, you can see that we're literally stealing one part of the photo and painting it somewhere else. That's all the clone tool does. Now if you make a mistake, you just press Ctrl-Z on your keyboard, so that's going to take us back a step, press it again, and that's going to take us back to where we were. And you can also reset the tool using this little icon here. And so what I want to do now is sort out this area here. We've got discoloration and we've got a lack of information. So currently you don't really know that that's sand there. If we zoomed right in, we don't really know what's going on. And so what we need to do is borrow some sand from somewhere else on our image. So I'm going to take this area here that's not in the shadow, just the bit that's in the nice sun here. So all I need to do is click where I want to sample from. So I'll choose here, I'll click. Now our sample point is set. I can bring that over and I can start painting. Now currently I have that set to 100%. So what I'm taking from here is being painted directly over that area. Now if I carry on painting, it's just going to include the shadow area up here, which isn't what I want. So what I'm going to do is keep resampling this area here and other clean areas of sand as well, and just paint them in. And we can also drop the strength if we want to build the effect up with just a little bit more subtlety. And sometimes that is the way to go. We can see here that we should have shadow, and so for this one I'm going to steal from this bit here and just start easing that in. And it's working out quite nicely for us because that shadow does actually taper off into a more sunny area here. And that's perfect. We can do the same if we want to actually reintroduce a bit of sand along the bottom here, where things were just getting a little bit bleached out. Again, we can sample a new point there, which is going to allow us to drag from the left and move over to the right and just introduce some of this sand texture down into the bottom of the photo. We may want to borrow from this side over here where these people, or it looks like people walking across the dunes there, we may want to match that up over with this side. Now if we make the brush bigger, it's a bit easier to see exactly what we're painting. Crank the strength up to 100 and drop the size back down. I know that I'm just going to start painting in a horizon line there. I may just want to borrow some of this sandbank from the back there and just paint it in, not with 100% this time. I'm just going to start to sort of ease that in with 50%. Now I don't know exactly what should be appearing just down the side here, but it's not super important. It's not a main part of the photo. We just need to give the essence of land. And so I think what I'm going to do is actually just borrow a little bit from the neck of the Sphinx here and use that. It's just going to add in a little bit of that texture as I bring that down. Something like that will be fine. Okay, now we've looked at the principles of how to retouch an old photo using the erase tool, the clone tool. I'm going to show you an alternative technique that can be greatly simplified for things like the sky in this example. We can use Luminar Neo's AI to actually help us along the way. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I zoom into the sky, you can see quite clearly that it's still a real mess in there. So what's a good approach to cleaning that up? Well, we could look at using denoise. We could use the denoise AI if we have that plugin extension as well. However, another approach would be for us to select the sky and then just introduce a flat neutral tone over the top there, just to push back all of that detail. So a way to do that is to jump into the develop tool once again, and we're going to come to the curves tool. Now you may have noticed before, if we bring these points in, the more steep this line gets, the more contrast we have. But conversely, the flatter this line gets, the less contrast we have. So if you look at the sky, if I start pushing that up, and you can barely see anything now, we've pretty much gone to a grey, but we've absolutely minimized all that noise. So if we could actually match the tonal value, the brightness that we had in the sky before, and then just mask this effect in, we'd be in a pretty good place. So what I'm going to do is actually use a linear gradient, just a really fine one here, so that I can actually see the difference between the two sides here. And that's going to allow me just to grab these handles and actually try and match the brightness. Now it's hard to tell because currently we're looking at two different colors, and that's not making it easy. However, if I get a pretty good color match there just by changing the temperature, that's going to allow me to better match the brightness value in the sky to what previously existed. Okay, let's say I'm pretty happy with that. So now what we need to do is just get rid of the mask that I created, because that's rubbish. Let's kill that. Now, ideally, to mask the sky, I would love to leverage Mask AI and just click the sky button and have it miraculously mask the sky. But unfortunately, the artificial intelligence that looks for sky area is looking for clues, things like blue, clouds, stuff like that, all the stuff that we just don't have here. So unfortunately, I can't leverage that in this particular photo, but you may be able to in your edits, particularly if you're using color photos that you're working with. But an alternative approach could be to try to actually select the inverse of the sky. So we could say grab the architecture, grab any humans, grab any mountains, natural ground, or man-made objects. We could then come back into our brush, push the strength to 100, and with a nice big brush just quickly fill in that area. But currently we've got the opposite effect of what we want, so all we need to do is invert the mask. So I'm just going to click that button there, and now you can see that we're starting to make progress with masking that sky. Now all I need to do is grab my brush again and just come in and paint this just a little bit more accurately. Now I'm going to use the same technique that I said to you about earlier, which was to click in one place, hold the shift key and move to the next area. So along this horizon line, I can click once, hold the shift key, and then click at the end of the line. And that's going to quickly make a nice straight line for me. Now I'm doing this with my mouse, but if you guys have access to a graphics tablet, I strongly recommend using it. I usually use my Wacom graphics tablet, and I always get asked which one I use, so I'll put a link to that in the description as well. And if the sky mask is encroaching on areas you don't want it to, like on the pyramid here, you just press the X key on your keyboard, and that is going to switch you between the paint mode and the erase mode, so you can quickly erase areas of the mask that you don't want to be there. Now, because we match the tonality of this new area we're introducing with the sky, we don't need to be super precise with the mask. It's going to be a little bit forgiving around these edges, but the better the job we can do with the mask, the better the result is going to be. But we can also see, because we've introduced this completely flat tone to unify the sky, it doesn't really look that believable and doesn't tie into the photographic feel of what we already had. And so I'm just going to knock that mask back a little bit by using the erase tool with a low percentage. So I'll set my strength, I don't know, somewhere around 8. That's fine. And let's increase the size all the way to 400 so we can get this done nice and quickly. And I'm going to click once in the top left hand corner and just make sure that I cover this whole area. And now we're going to see 92% of the effect, not 100. And as I zoom back in, it may be hard to see on YouTube, but I can definitely see that I've reintroduced some of that texture, but without reintroducing all of those nasty speckles. Okay, it's coming together. So we're now at the step where we can actually convert this photo to a black and white, and that's going to give it a much more harmonious and unified feel. So I'm looking forward to this, but you need to pay attention because it's really, really tough to do. Right, let's get back into Luminar. Pay attention. You ready? Okay, listen carefully. In the essential section, you need to come down to black and white, and you're going to press convert to black and white. Difficult, right? Of course, I'm teasing. So simple to do this. But now I just think we need to inject a little bit more contrast back into the image and finalize and finesse things. Luminar Neo's got a plethora of tools for dealing with contrast and improving our images, often with AI enhancements. So I'm going to share with you now the ones that give you the most bang for your buck when it comes to restoring and enhancing old photos. Let's take a look. Of course, one of the absolute powerhouses behind Luminar is the Accent AI tool. And as I crank that up to 100 and toggle the before and after, you can see just how powerful that is. You can also see that it's bringing back a lot of that detail that I worked so hard to get rid of. So it's not something that you necessarily want to apply across your whole image. You can use it selectively. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. If I toggle the before and after, I'm just looking around the image for areas where I like what it's doing. Then I can grab my brush in paint mode with a low strength, somewhere around 26 is fine. Reduce my brush size and then pop a little bit over this guy, particularly over his face because he is still looking a little washed out. Certainly over the guy in the center, the camel, and this fella as well. And yes, absolutely, I could use Mask AI to do this a lot quicker. But I'll be honest, sometimes I forget it's even there. And I'm quite happy just using my brush. So I'm just going to apply some of that over the central figures like that. Let's have a little toggle of our before and our after, just a subtle pop. Of course, the Structure AI tool, again, is another really powerful tool. So if I grab the slider and start bringing that up, you can see that we're certainly introducing more structure, more clarity, more detail. Where you want to apply that, that's up to you. Again, you could do it globally across your whole photo or be a little more specific. So I actually quite like what it's doing to the Sphinx's head here. So I'll just pop a little bit of that on there. Bringing up detail in my main characters, surely that's got to be a good thing. And that guy as well. Let's have a look at our before and our after. So at this point you might be thinking, Anthony, you keep talking about contrast, but what about the softness and lack of clarity in the image, the sharpness that is missing? Well, a tool that's really good for dealing with that is the Details tool. I don't often use it in my normal photography because the lenses that we're blessed with today create such a sharp image, but in these older photos that need restoring, it can really help us out. So let's have a look at what we can do. I'll open the details section there, and probably a good idea would be to zoom in. I'm going to come to 200% so I can get a better feel for what's going on. So we can grab the small details and crank that all the way to 100 and just see what it's doing for us. And we can toggle the eyeball tool to see before and after. So that's certainly helping us. What about the medium details? Let's crank those up. Looks a little softer with that, but it's certainly adding detail. And the large details, that looks like it can help us too. What about sharpening? Much finer details being brought out there, but again, that can help. So what I'd like to do is actually introduce these, but not with the level of intensity that we had before. So I'm just going to drop them back. I think large details and small details were the ones that were helping us the most. And now I'm going to zoom back out because you've got to remember, you are not going to be blowing your photo up that big. I certainly hope not from a small scan of a 6x4. And once you zoom out and then you're able to see the before and the after, you're able to see the impact of what you're actually creating here. And now we're zoomed out, you can see that it is just a little bit too heavy-handed. So I'm just going to bring those down quite far, and I'm much happier with a more subtle result. So while the details sliders can actually help us give the illusion of bringing back detail into our photo, it doesn't solve the problem that is there with so many old photos when we're trying to restore old photos is they are soft. And so in 2023, the best way to reintroduce sharpness into our photo is to leverage AI, artificial intelligence, to help us along the way. And Luminar Neo has an extension, Super Sharp AI. You don't have to have it, but if you do, for this kind of work, it's really going to help help. I'll put a link to it in the description just in case you don't have it yet. But one of the great things that it has built into it is Face Enhancer AI. So we can sharpen the image, and also it can actually recreate faces for us as well. I'm thinking that because we have the Sphinx in this photo, it may actually get confused and think that is a face. I'll be interested to see what it does with it. So let's give it a whirl and see what the results are. So here's our photo that I'm just going to zoom to 200% so you can get an appreciation for just how soft it is. Like, we can get a hint of this guy's face, but there just aren't any details there, and there's certainly a lack of sharpness in this photo. So let's come back to a more usable sort of view. Maybe 75% is okay. Let's jump into super sharp AI. I'm happy to give universal a go. You can either go with that or motion blur, but for this one, universal, and I'm just going to go for a low amount and see what Luminar Neo comes up with. Now, the speed of your computer is obviously going to determine the speed at which you get your result back, and AI technology is particularly demanding of your processor, so you may need to be patient, but my result is back, so let's take a look. Doesn't look too bad at all. Let's have a little toggle of the before. We can certainly see some blur there, and after, the edges have certainly got cleaned up. So here's our before, and here's our after. The faces are already looking much better, but I'm just wondering if we click Face Enhancer, what the results will be compared to the standard processing. And there we go. All of a sudden, this guy's got some eyes, he's got a nose and a mouth. This guy too. Let's zoom into these guys. Okay, here's our before, a very amorphous and soft looking face, and here's our after, a little bit spooky with some eyes introduced. Don't really know how it does that, but it's extremely clever. But you'll notice something that's gone hideously wrong here. In the background, our Sphinx has been mutilated. I mean, it was already looking a bit of a mess, but look at it now. Oh god. But don't worry, because as with most things in the Luminar Neo, it comes with a mask, so we can paint this and apply it only where we want it. So let's jump into the masking section. I'm going to go to Mask AI this time. The scene gets analyzed, and now I have the option to select human. And there we go, the Sphinx is back to normal. And if we want to just work on that mask a little more, we can do that with the brush and just fill in any areas where we also want to include that sharpness. Of course, we can finish things off by adding a bit more drama. We could grab the dramatic slider, which is great for black and white imagery. You know, just put a little bit more punch into our photo. And if you like the idea of a bit of color toning, you can always do that with the mood section. And we can just add a little pop of color toning into that as well, just so it's not a pure black and white. We're just introducing a little bit of color into the highlights and the shadows. And when you're happy with your result, you just export it in the same way I showed you earlier. So now it is time for my favorite bit of any video, our before and after. Let's take a look. I'm actually going to reset that mood tool because I just want mine to be a pure black and white. And now I'm going to use the / key on my keyboard. That reveals our original, our before. Look at that, faded, marks everywhere, release. We've got a nice bit of contrast. We can see the people's faces again, before and after. Now I'm viewing this on a pretty huge screen. I have no intention of printing this anywhere near this big. If I zoom it back to approximately the size that this was scanned from, which is about this, about a 6x4, again, I can press the before. This was my original, approximate original size, and release for the after. Here's our before, here's our after. Hopefully you guys will agree that is a big improvement. If you've been watching this and thought of other ideas of how to restore old photos, please leave them in the comments below. Help everybody out by sharing some ideas that you might have. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If Luminar Neo is your thing, you might want to check that video out right there. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, you can do that by clicking that button there. Thanks so much. See you in the next one.